The political horizon does not look good for Zimbabwe. And I'll tell you why. What has happened essentially since the coup that took place in 2017 is that the Zimbabwean state has become even more militarized than it was under Mugabe. You see, under Mugabe, there had been an effort to camouflage the military's role in politics. There was an effort to give the military a professional face. It reflects civilian oversight, civilian authority, and to a very large extent, I mean, this was done very cleverly because international partners genuinely believed that the Zimbabwe Defense Force was one of the most professional outfits on the African continent. And it acquitted itself quite admirably. I worked in a previous life, I worked on peacekeeping issues in SADC, and I was a regular visitor to the Regional Peacekeeping Training Center, the RPTC in Harare, and I conducted quite a number of trainings there for these officers, and very impressive officer corps, very well spoken, highly educated, So I can understand those in the international community who still argue very strongly that the Zimbabwe military was essentially one of the best out there in Africa. I mean, in peacekeeping, its peacekeeping experience, and so on. If you look at its facilities, very well kept facilities, excellent academic or officer academic institutions, and so forth. But this was really a mirage, because while all this was taking place, there were other units of the Zimbabwe military that were being trained, that were outside that chain of command, that were outside, what I've been talking about. Units that were insulated from the extensive military professionalism programs that were run, for instance, by the British. The British military training teams that were at all levels of the professional military education system in Zimbabwe, right? But they were not allowed to interact with these units, like the unit that was trained by the North Koreans, which is implicated in these Matabeleland massacres. Very, very tragic, which up until now have not been properly discussed in the country. That was going on, right? So Zimbabwe really sits in this very hazy juncture where you have elements of the security services that seemed to be professional, but at the same time a rump sections of that military that were heavily politicized and actually even came from one particular ethnic group. So that has been the story of Zimbabwe. And I think what has happened over time is that the sort of deviant that section, of the military that was highly politicized and so on, that has now become the larger reality in which Zimbabwe's military has been sucked into. So going back to my point, the state is much more militarized. The party itself is much more militarized. Essentially, if one looks at what has been happening with ZANU over the past decade, there was a point at which it looked like ZANU was actually collapsing. It was imploding. And if it had not been for the military, which really is the backbone of ZANU-PF, the party would have, it was already disintegrating, right? And it is difficult to imagine a ZANU without support from the military. It's essentially a party army, and it is a party state. And this is what has happened in Zimbabwe. So yes, I agree with you. And the prognosis does not look good because while that militarization continues, you also have efforts by the party itself, or whatever is left of the party, to gain, which in fact it has. It has now crossed the threshold, because there were by-elections just a few days ago, of which ZANU-PF has now basically increased its parliamentary strength, and it has crossed now the two-thirds threshold that it needs to be able to introduce constitutional changes. And the talk in Zimbabwe now, and I was talking to some colleagues in Harare a few days ago in preparation for this meeting, that there's a suspicion that Mnangagwa, who's 81, is most certainly going to push for a third term. So, in other words, Zimbabwe is now going to join a growing list of African parties that have overturned their constitutions and manipulated them in order to extend their stays in office. This is only going to make the situation worse. There have been more Zimbabweans that have fled the country after these elections. You always have these migrations of Zimbabweans after each election. The economic situation is not getting any better. Inflation is still a problem. Basic necessities are not available, and so the prognosis is not good. The lessons of history teach us that militaries are not meant to govern, and when a political system is built to basically survive, to increase its longevity and its strength through military control, at some point there will be an implosion, and Zimbabwe appears to be traveling along that trajectory.